Hi there. Thanks everybody for being patient and hanging around with us. So we're just starting the next session now, which is an alternate universe without collaboration. I'll go ahead and advance into our slides. We will have limited time to answer questions today, so I apologize for those of you that may have questions. Please reach out to either Brandon or myself. We have LinkedIn profiles, and we also have profiles here on the swap card application. So I'm going to go ahead and get right into it. So the theme of the day is automotive security without collaboration. So we highlighted the theme of the day is collaboration, and sort of what we're trying to point to is here is what the security landscape of the automotive industry would look like, just a kind of an alternate universe without that collaboration that's happened in the past. So Brandon, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. So Joby, thanks for having me here. I'm the CEO of Block Harbor Cybersecurity in my day job, where we've been working with automotive suppliers and automakers since 2014 on the issue of automotive cybersecurity. And then when I'm not working on that, I'm working with the Automotive Security Research Group, which we'll get into a little bit later, but is a community-driven organization globally around the world, over 30 chapters all over the place, where we're trying to establish a community where we're getting hackers and engineers and managers and everyone in the same room and really talking about research in the space, collaborating, Joby.
That's awesome. Yeah, so my name is Joby Jester. You might have remembered that from the introduction a few minutes ago. So my day job is a solutions architect or DEDO, sort of the interface between our research and engineering groups and our sales team. And additionally, I lead the Geneva security team, which if you haven't heard about us before, you'll hear about us at the end of this presentation as well. Brandon, get us started. So we're talking about an alternate universe of automotive cybersecurity without collaboration. So you're familiar with the security operations centers that run in a lot of organizations. So what are your takes? Like, if we didn't have collaboration, what would those security operations centers be looking like today?
Yeah, so a security operations center, by and large, it serves the purpose of following these kind of NIST principles is what I like to point to, of identifying threats, protecting against those threats, detecting an attack, responding to that attack, and recovering. And so, a security operations center is the people, the processes, and technologies that enable that process. Typically, it's surrounding, what's referred to as a SIEM, a security information and event manager. And that SIEM aggregates and collects data from all kinds of data sources in a system. And then you're trying to detect attacks against that system, also doing things like trying to detect vulnerabilities or weaknesses that may appear in it. And so today, what we're borrowing in the automotive security space a lot from is what people have done in the traditional IT SOC space, where you're taking data from your own systems, you're combining that with data from community-driven threat feeds. You're really trying to get as much data, not just from your own organization, but from a number of places in the same spot so that you can adequately detect attacks and respond to those. And so, this area without collaboration, what are the things that you lose? Well, you lose that community-driven aspect where you have security operations centers from all sorts of companies collaborating with each other, sharing threat feeds and threat information. In the automotive security space, particularly, you're worried about the supply chain. An attack on any part of the supply chain may permeate to the vehicle. And so if you don't have this kind of collaborative security operations center ecosystem where a supplier detects an attack against them and can quickly notify their customers, an automaker or anyone else, then it'll take a long time before an attack is stopped. And really, that's what this is all about: is being able to have a security operations center that can respond quickly and effectively to an attack, especially when passenger safety is at risk.
So is there any major difference between a traditional SOC and a vehicle SOC?
I mean, the really one of the big differences is that it relies more on collaboration. You know, an IT security operations center, you're thinking about IP addresses attacking a system. You know, you don't know who it is, and you know, it could be anyone, and you're trying to stop it. Or you're thinking about, you know, someone social engineering an employee to exfiltrate data or gain access to privileged systems. With a vehicle security operations center, it's all of that, plus the fact that, I mean, there are just so many challenges in, again, the supply chain where you have to collaborate with everyone. You have to really establish quick pipelines between companies, between silos inside of your organizations, because again, it's response time. That's the big difference here. An IT security operations center can afford to wait 300 days or whatever to detect an attack, but not a vehicle security operations center, because that attack could impact a passenger safety, but then also, you know, permeate and impact more passengers and cars on the road.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And just because we're a little crunched on time here, we're going to go ahead and start talking a little bit about open source tool chain. Brandon and I will get on this. So open source, just simply, if you're not familiar with the term, is freely available software, right? And so tools in the hacker community are used to investigate, explore, and exploit as far as finding vulnerabilities. And we're not talking about always these bad guys, right? You know, there are a lot of research and ethical hackers out there, and they love open source tools. Imagine if you were a mechanic and Snap-on arrived at your garage and said, take anything you want, and you can use it on the car and it's yours to keep, right? And in fact, we'll give you the blueprints. If you want to modify it, you could do so. That's what the kind of open source toolkit does for this, you know, ethical hacking and research hacking. And there's tons of industry level tools out there that people use, like Metasploit, Nmap, Wireshark, so many that I can't even list, that are all open source. And what open source means is that people come and collaborate, they develop, they iterate, they check the security of the tool itself to make sure it's not been affected. And it's free in most cases, although there are commercially available licenses for these for your organizations. I mean, if you're learning how to do this, this is something that you need these tools, right? And in Kali Linux, the entire toolbox is open source, right? And they have open source guides on how to start doing pen testing. I mean, I don't think many of our organizations could go without these sort of people doing these pen tests. And if we don't have these tools as part of a collaborative effort, and keep producing them and keep making them available, I mean, only the truly most wealthy of people will be able to do hacking, right? We're talking nation states and military efforts and things like that, right? Because they would have the money to buy tools that were, you know, commercially only. So, Brandon, your take on this?
Yeah, so, you know, in some ways I would kind of compare this to what I was just talking about, this tension between the traditional cybersecurity industry and the automotive security industry. I come from a research background. You know, I got started with SocketCan working in the Linux kernel. Those tools are the things that enabled me to get started in the space in the first place. But then you kind of hit a wall pretty quickly, where there aren't so many open source tools in the space. And, you know, you go to one hacker conference like DEF CON, you go to the car hacking village, you're meeting the people like Craig Smith who are creating the tools that enable you to do work in this space. And, you know, I think that this is somewhere that, you know, we really do need to take a lesson from. You know, maybe we aren't so good at the automotive industry isn't so good at collaborating with the open source community, because, you know, in the automotive security space, what collaboration may look like is, you know, you have your suppliers, you have automakers developing tools and making them open source, because sure, you're equipping attackers. Attackers will almost certainly use those tools against you, but you're also enabling researchers to perform that same work. So Joby, I think in some ways this is, you know, this is one area that this space is lacking. is collaboration with the open source tool community.
Absolutely, yeah, I've run into that in my past as well. Just a few minutes, kind of an expansion of that is vulnerability databases and threat modeling. So when we look at MITRE's vulnerability database, for instance, there's over 140,000 unique CVEs, which is just another term for, vulnerability or exploit, right? Each one of those has a risk scoring, or a CVSS, stands for Common Vulnerability Scoring Systems. And both of those things, while MITRE is a company and organization that supports it, it is a data aggregator really for the community, right? And so if you're trying to do a Terra in order to investigate and understand what your threat and risk analysis for a particular system or subsystem looks like, you need access to what everyone else has found so far, right? So that collaboration effort, and that is an ongoing, ever bettering itself, right? CVSS scores get updated and they get better ratings on things, so they're more specific. If those were only available commercially, how do you think that would make it harder to do a day-to-day job of doing a threat analysis?
Yeah, and Joby, it's not just these CVE databases either. It's, those are the publicly accessible things that everyone can use, but also it's through things like one company talking to another, through groups like the Auto ISAC, through groups like the Geneva security team, through public-private partnerships between governments and organizations where vulnerabilities are shared in order to kind of increase the security of everyone's posture. So, I can't really think about it. I mean, think about having a team of even 50 security professionals. I mean, the systems are so complex. I cannot imagine that anyone would say that they think they could identify all of the vulnerabilities in that system without these kind of open source feeds of vulnerabilities, but then also these public-private partnerships and company partnerships. I mean, really, it takes a team. It takes a team to identify these vulnerabilities. It takes a team to stop, to address those vulnerabilities in your ecosystem. And then my second take on this is the way that this affects the researcher, because I think, Joby, you and we probably both submitted research and vulnerabilities to companies. If one thing that's terrible as a researcher is when your vulnerability in research goes into a black hole and you have no idea where it ever goes. You have no idea whether it's ever addressed. You have no idea, you put a lot of hard work into this. It's not something, I mean, sometimes you stumble upon it, but many times you put a lot of hard work into it. And from a researcher standpoint, I mean, collaboration helps a lot here, because when you see that you submit a vulnerability to an automaker or company, and then that permeates down the supply chain and you get a report back and you can see exactly the cascade effect that had, I mean, that's really meaningful to a researcher. And so, I think that collaboration in this space sure helps companies, but also helps researchers become more engaged and really, it gives a purpose to kind of submitting these vulnerabilities.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your take on that. I really appreciate it. So what we're highlighting here is the ASRG. We have limited time available before we have the next panel, but I wanted to just highlight ASRG and its ever increasing coverage of the world. And if you have any questions, of course, there will hopefully be some information available to you after this so that you can get in touch with Brandon. And then, of course, the Geneva security team. Of course, we're running this. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Up in a couple minutes, we will have Gabriella and Jennifer talking about automotive data privacy. And so if you do have any questions, again, please, unfortunately, we don't have time to answer them live, but send them to me. I'll be happy to answer them, and I'll take a look at everything you have to say. Thanks again, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over back to the organization. Thanks again.